Hello, everyone. Monae, the creator here, and I'm really excited to share this special interview that I actually did back in October. This is for the Open Science Initiative at the Harvard Medical School Library, so I hope you enjoy this short interview where I talk a little bit about how I navigated my own hidden curriculum. Hello, my name is Ebony Arnold, and I am a G2 or a second year in the Biological and Biomedical Sciences program at Harvard University.
Welcome. And so I think what I kind of would just like to hear, like you're saying, like your story.
Yeah.
That would, I think, because what you were talking about earlier with like the NIH, I think that's like the essence of what we wanted to capture.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to let you tell me a story.
Yeah. So I'll start with kind of the personal statement, as I mentioned before. I was born and raised in a small town called Titusville, Florida.
Okay.
Lots of people don't know where that is, but if you know where the Kennedy Space Coast is, we are directly next to that, yeah. So that means I grew up right outside of NASA and the Kennedy Space Center. And growing up, I saw so many rocket launches. I saw just so many space expeditions, and I was so excited by it. I remember going on field trips out there and being so fascinated by space, being so fascinated by the stars. At one point, I'd been gifted like a telescope for my birthday, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing ever!" Yeah. And I would use it all the time, and I felt like it was just too far away, if that makes sense. Like I just felt like I couldn't quite see it, touch it, feel it. It was beautiful to look at.
Yeah.
And I had been watching documentaries about space, about science, biology in general. And that then at some point around then I realized like, oh my goodness, these microscopes, they do the same exact thing except for things here on this planet. Mm-hmm. And there's so many small things that these microscopes are able to see, and they show these small things and these small processes contribute to a fully functioning organism. And that is absolutely incredible. Just as incredible as like life existing here on Earth. There are all these planets in the solar system that happens to work and continue to evolve at all this time since the universe's beginning. And I've always been intrigued by science for that reason. And then secondly, and this isn't the best story, but I think it's a little bit on the medical and health inequity side, and just trying to explore and understand that side. But when I was really, really young, I used to go to a pediatrician, like most children did, and my mom started noticing I had these dry rashes on my skin. And she would ask the doctor about it, and he would just say, she just needs more moisture, or she just needs more lotion, or she just needs this, she just needs that. And he would just dismiss and be extremely dismissive of whatever experiences or whatever thing I had going on. And at some point, my mom really was just not okay with that answer. And she knew that I was visibly irritated and there's something greater going on. And so she finally decided to take me to an allergist. And what's really interesting about that story is that like she decided to do two things that day. Is one, I went to an allergist. I got my answer. I found out I had eczema. I've always had eczema. I have a lot of triggers. I have allergies, all those great things. But then secondly, I stopped going to a pediatrician. I never had a consistent physician until I started grad school here. And that is 22 years of my life without a consistent doctor outside of like my allergists are going to see, I don't even know, a dentist, like just random doctors, but never having that. Just having that safety in that, okay, this doctor and this professional really cares for me and my health and my advancement. And at that time, I really could have taken it two ways as well. Like I could have said, oh, okay, well, this doctor was very dismissive about my symptoms. I just don't want to deal with the medical field. I'm not interested in that. But as I started meeting with my allergist, however many times a year it was, I just started asking her so many questions and just getting so intrigued by, oh, like this skin condition is caused by all these immune cells and this kind of happens and it attacks itself accidentally because it thinks it's foreign, and all these different things that she was telling me about. And I was just so intrigued by it, and I would come back with more questions at the next appointment and more just trying to understand more. And it's really because people would ask me about it. People would ask, oh, well, why is your skin like this? Or why is this dark spot there? Or is this contagious? And I couldn't answer those questions without my doctor at the end of the day. So it's funny how like losing that one doctor, the pediatrician, kind of transformed into me gaining a relationship with an allergist and really getting to learn about the immune system in that way, very informally. But like this is when I couldn't even tell you honestly. I think my mom would probably say I was 1 or 2 years old whenever that happened.
Oh wow.
And I didn't start asking questions. I mean, I started talking very early, but I started asking questions like very early in my little career, my little elementary career. But I've always been intrigued by science for that reason too. And now I realize that that's kind of a manifestation of health inequity. And now, being up here in Boston, there's a lot of different trials and things going on, a lot of different research studies. And recently I was actually recruited for I found a study for people that had eczema, and it was a training system for doctors and AIs to be able to recognize what skin conditions looked like on certain skin colors. And it's things like that right there that make the difference, because we could train AI to detect breast cancer early. That's great. But if we only have a sample size of white women, then different. Who do you expect to be diagnosed correctly? Right? Mm-hmm. It looks different for every single population, for every single background. And all of these decisions in science, and me being here in this space in science, like being able to bring this mindset here of you have to think across the board, because if you think across the board, you're able to impact more people and get more people the help that they need, or the medical attention that they need, or even just the science knowledge that they need. Because now I'm starting to realize like how the health equity is turned into science equity. Is that I was very blessed and lucky that I love science, and that I had a mom that was a biomedical engineer, and I was near the Space Center and all those things, and had that exposure to science. But realistically, not everybody does, and that's where it goes back to the NIH thing, where it's really unfair that people don't know what happens behind closed doors, and they pay all these taxpayer dollars, and all this money goes into research, but people don't know what happens. And even if they do get a research paper, what is the chance they can read it? There's so much jargon, there's so much esoteric rhetoric, there's so much just hand waving, there's all these model systems, there's all these these complicated experiments, and I can explain things to my mom, and I know she's a biomedical engineer, but I can definitely sit down and take the time to explain, okay, and this is the experiment I did, and when I saw this, I saw the DNA, and with the DNA, I can do this. And she can follow that. And it takes the scientist meeting the person where they are. And a lot of people are not willing to do that. And it really does contribute a lot to the way science is viewed in our society. And last thing I'll try to include from the personal statement is that I feel like with this whole situation, that science exists as a black box. It's okay, my money that I pay to the government, it goes to the black box, and then we see the output, and there's eventually a cancer therapeutic. Great. But no one knows what happens in that in-between step. And realistically, there's a lot of mistrust in that. There's a lot of doubts in that. I mean, you saw how the COVID vaccination situation went, and we had a vaccine in such a short time, but I mean, could I even trust a vaccine like that? I know the vaccines are not supposed to be created that quickly, so that it even concerned me. But simultaneously, whenever people are rushing the process and they don't understand how the process works because it's a black box, what do you expect to happen?
Exactly what happened.
And this is exactly what happened. And not to say that the COVID vaccine or any vaccine is causing just huge detrimental effects or anything like that, but it could, because those mistakes could happen, and people are just trying to rush the science without understanding how the science happens. But
that's true. I think if there's a little more explanation, like with the COVID vaccine, I think, I would hope, I'd hope that more people would be more open to it. And I feel that, like you're saying, like their black box is that we don't really know what's going on behind, the closed doors. We don't know what's going on. And then you get this paper that the layperson can't understand. So they're not going to trust that at all.
Exactly. So, what's the chance of you trusting something you don't even
it's like reading a foreign language.
Exactly. It's a whole nother language, just like code, just like anything else. Science is a whole nother language to learn.
well, I mean, because we're talking about like science equity and health equity.
Mhm.
So obviously it would seem then that having like open access to articles, to kind of like the protocol. I mean, this is always like with the understanding that the people who are looking at it are going to understand, and that's a
Yeah.
whole different can of worms to like get into. It's like, how do you even
Yeah.
stepping over that, knowing that that is a big big hurdle. How I guess just getting your thoughts and opinions, like how important having, you know, like the citizen scientists, you know, having, you know, public your methods, the work that you did, like publication, there being some sort of accountability toward hopefully helping push more health and medical equity and science equity. Because, and I feel like it's not just like producing the product, it's also going back to, you know, like grade school and stuff, is like understanding it's like we have to kind of incorporate it when we're younger. And so hopefully that we can start at least maybe understanding a little bit, to then hopefully as we're adults and we're have more access to things. But I know I'm just thinking about like here at Harvard, like with the journals and everything that we have here are just, we have everything because it's a very wealthy institution. But then you think about, I mean, you can just go down the road and other colleges don't have it. And so how, I mean, we are kind of setting up ourselves, like, it's not just like, so we have like science equity and health equity, but it really is just like knowledge equity. And I think that's kind of, at least for me, I mean, I can't, like my experience, that's just like where it seems to stem from. But thoughts on like how maybe that can help, or like ways that you've seen in your like time both here at Harvard and just like, you know, undergrad and everything growing up, like how that might help. I don't know if that's a question.
No, I think I do have like a direction or like a general idea. Funding equity. I think that's a big part of it, because, and funny enough, the last week or two I've been either reading articles or like literally our ethics class tomorrow. We have a discussion about science incentives and funding and like how all that situation works. But what is really interesting is last week I was reading this article about the National Science Foundation's GRFP, or the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. And this specific grant is like, it's open to seniors, first and second years. You're only allowed to apply 2 times. And it is a basic science grant, and it is in all of the humanities, any form of science. It's such a big application pool. But what's I found interesting about this article is it talked about, okay, I have all these students that applied for it. Out of all these students, only 1 student got it, and I'm celebrating this, and I'm so happy for this. But then I look online and I look at the directory of where most of this funding is going. It's going to Harvard. It's going to the Ivy Leagues. It's going to these large institutions. And then it's like, okay, well, they also have the resources and the people and all these other things that also make them look better, or be able to produce a better grant, for a better personal statement, better science in general, just because they have those resources already. So it's almost like a funding inequity, for lack of a better word. It's really like there's already so much funding and investment in these larger institutions, and it's hard to justify not giving them that funding and trying to disperse it to other groups. And that's what that article was talking about. And the question is like, what do you do? I really don't know. And I know that like the funding inequity, whenever I think about like my own childhood, like, I grew up near the Space Center and I saw all these things and that was great. But had I not been near that, I definitely would not have gotten that experience. And I know that we get discounted tickets because we're within a certain region, and we're like all these other things that help with the funding and all of that, and being able to help us do that. But even so, I think of my undergraduate institution, University of Miami, and I mean, I personally feel like, as someone that was a striving PhD research scientist, there were not enough resources put into training for people that wanted to go and to become a PhD. And it was more so a focus on the med school part of it. And yes, they had this office and this resource, but at the end of the day, the fact that I got a summer science experience my junior years because I did the research and I got a random email or I saw something online, I was looking for it. It had nothing to do with the university. And so is it a funding issue? Because that's also a private institution. Is it where do you put the funding and attention? And then who, right? Because that's a wealthy private institution in Miami versus a HBCU, right? That may need those same resources. I remember writing on my statement for college that I wanted to bring resources to HBCUs because to me, if you can't get the science, like if you can't get that person to come to the science, then you bring it to them. And once again, it's that meeting them where they are. Because they don't have the resources to do that. Or maybe it's more comfortable to be surrounded by people that look like them to try to have that learning opportunity. Because I say this all the time, I'm not embarrassed to say it anymore. There are times I used to walk into my current lab during my rotation and I would be fearful, terrified, because I was worried about like, oh, I'm going to mess up. Maybe I don't know this. I don't know this answer to this question. If they ask me this, I don't know. I have to ask this question, but I don't want to seem stupid. Like all those little things that end up just being internal thoughts that technically mean nothing realistically, but that ends up driving people away from science because once again, you have this highly jargon, protocol, difficult, very hard to follow system that has been created. And then on top of that, science begets science. So in order to progress, you need to have letters of recommendation from scientists, right? Like all these things are just dominoes. And if your dominoes aren't lined up right, you're not going to get very far. It's just that simple. It hurts my soul.
I'm like, I definitely like I had pretty like privilege. I mean, there's just a lot, but it's like, like my family was not wealthy, and so it's like I was the first person in my family to like get a 4-year degree and to get like a graduate degree, and so I was literally just like, I don't know, I think I do this, and so probably why I have like massive student debt. But I mean, if you don't, it is, 'cause it's very different from like my peers like into high school, and then after like going into grad school who had like parents or that social network that they could tap into, and just that someone that you can ask. The support is huge because I had no idea. I was literally just fumbling in the dark. And that is a huge thing. So
and I would say, I guess as an extension to my personal statement story, that my like getting into science, so regardless of the fact that I had like those exposures and all these things, and I loved biology so much, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I had so many hesitations about becoming a doctor. I realize now, like 5-6 years later, it probably has something to do with my childhood, like having that experience and just like, for one, I don't want to do that to someone. I could easily non-purposely be prejudiced towards someone that just doesn't look like me, and I just don't know what a condition might manifest in someone that has a different skin color. If I was a dermatologist, et cetera, et cetera. But it was my junior year of high school, and I had this teacher for anatomy and physiology, and she was asking me like, oh, what are you going to do after high school? What are you planning on doing? And I told her like, I know I like biology. I know I want to go to college, and I know I don't want to be a doctor. Those are the three things. And she proposes to me. She's like, oh, like there's a science research program at University of Florida, and it's called the Student Science Training Program. It's for juniors in high school, and it's a science training program. So why don't you try to apply and do it? And just a few years prior to that, I had a grandmother that had been diagnosed with a tumor on her pituitary gland, and she was hospitalized at that time at Shands Hospital, which is affiliated with UF. And it ended up being a very complicated surgery. She was in that hospital for a long time. Gainesville's like 2.5 to 3 hours from my home. We drove back and forth like so many times for this purpose, or just being off of work, being out of school, all these things. And unfortunately she passed away some months later, maybe about 8 months later. And I found myself A, terrified of University of Florida, B, thinking about like, well, what if it's because she's Black? What if that's the reason why? And she was also, like, side note, she was a smoker, and that's one of the reasons why she had a lot of complications post-surgery. And then 3, I found myself so interested in the fact that A, she developed a tumor, and then B, she started going blind. And that was how we knew that something was going on. And she went to the eye doctor, and they said, like, your eyes seem fine. You should go to a neurologist and get this checked out, because it could be something wrong with your optic tract. And that's how they found out that she had a tumor. So like that had instilled a lot of hesitation about UF. I didn't really have a lot of interest. And I was like, it was one of those moments where I had to say, well, if not now, then when, and why not? Like the worst that can happen is they say no, or the worst that can happen is I go there and turns out I don't want to be a scientist, and now I have more direction for whenever I go to college. And I went to this program. I was in a material science and engineering lab, because at the time I was like, oh, my mom's a biomedical engineer. Like, maybe I want to do something similar, blah, blah, blah. Did not like that. I was like, wow, like this material science stuff is interesting, but not my interest. But what I found myself so excited for was that process, like going in, reading the papers, testing things out, trying to think, okay, maybe if I implement this protocol, if I try this procedure, maybe this will work. Trying to culminate all of your literature, all those things is what made me fall in love with science, not necessarily the science that I was doing at that time. And I feel like if more people just had the opportunity, that exposure to see, science in my eyes is a lot like cooking. It's extremely creative. It's extremely like you kind of get in what you put out. Or you get out what you put in. Right. And I really have this appreciation, the creativity side of it. And I feel like it's so beautiful getting to do that. And a lot of people don't see that, because there's that inherent intimidation that blocks most people from seeing past the first pass, honestly. And it's really hard to, at the end of the day, you have to just keep reading, and it comes with time. It's not something that is, okay, you read it one time, you remember all of the antibody names and all these things, and you're good. Like, no, I still Google almost everything. Most people Google almost everything. And we live in such a fast and changing world that, like, that's okay. And it's okay to not know those things. And I think that, like, with less of that intimidation there, it's all about learning. It's all about trial and error. That is science. It's not about doing something perfect. And that can be very hard to swallow for a lot of people. I just really want, my dream would be more people just to love science and understand, like, why it is a creative outlet in some sense, a way for you to just test things out or problem solve. Like, I love problem solving. And it's just a matter of figuring out how you make that work for you.
It's I'm just like, a lot of the things you said, I'm like, I remember being in high school and like I like history. What do you want to do with it? Be a teacher? I don't want to be a teacher. And what do you do? I don't know. I guess I'm gonna go find out. And then, it just, that would have been nice if I had an opportunity to do something like that. But I just like your stories. I'm like, I understand, but I relate to that. Sorry, that's not very helpful in progressing the story. How long do you have?
I just want to say I love that your take on open science is so expansive and it covers so much, because oftentimes when we talk about open science, we're not talking about like basic scientific literacy. Right?
And now this is where I think like this whole basic scientific literacy thing like really like started striking home for me. There's this podcast called Sold a Story, and it's about the reading epidemic in America.
Ooh.
And it is, I highly recommend you listen to it because it will just open your eyes to just, oh my gosh, not only is it like literally you're sold a story, but whenever scientific evidence comes to back something, a lot of the times the monetary value and the companies behind it and all these things that have already fed into that system will outrun the science. The science will go out the door.
Yeah.
And that is disappointing. But that was when I started to realize, like, oh my goodness, like, it's about people having access to the science and understanding it. And like, of course, you're not going to be excited about something that you never heard about.
Yeah.
Like, just that simple. And my experience with science growing up is much, much different than someone that has Harvard parents, right?
Yeah.
Like, extremely different. It doesn't even have to be about what their profession is. They could be a lawyer, they could be whatever, engineer. Yeah. But what happens is whenever you have that environment that is funded and you have that support that comes from the family, then you teach your child that they're unstoppable and they can learn and do anything. You can give them that tutoring help if they need it, if they don't understand something, if they're interested in something. And a lot of groups just don't get that. And that education equity as a whole has been on my mind a lot. And it's a problem, like, well, how do you fix it? And you could say, oh, government funding and oh, government this. Well, what's gonna lose money? Because that either people are gonna get taxed more, the people are gonna end up, or the society's gonna end up losing money, or some other government funded thing is gonna lose money. You know, something that's extremely underfunded is women's studies.
Yeah.
Women's studies, anything about pregnancy, people don't want to talk about it. Sex education, people don't want to talk about it. And it's like, in reality, if you had more sex education, then you wouldn't have so many babies, quote unquote, inappropriately born. You would just have more education about it, or less diseases, less stigma. That's all it is stigma and perception. How people try to make things seem versus how it really is. It just needs to be talked about. And beating around the bush, or just ignoring it, or just having to do your own research on your own time. And most people don't do that, don't have the time for that. Like, it just really cuts into all of that and just further perpetuates it. And I think it, and this is unfortunate, it feels like it keeps the society the way it is. It keeps it split, where you have your less educated group and your more educated group. And I remember hearing something recently about, you know, generational wealth, generational poverty. How, my mom might have been a PhD and she did this and she did that, but she has all these crippling student loans to pay for, and she can't really provide XYZ to me. Now I'm in a situation where I'm not getting the best education that I could. And the cycle just kind of flip-flops each generation down because of that. And then that becomes generational poverty instead of being able to build wealth, because we have to, at least a lot of minority groups, you have to go back and try to fix things so much that you can't just keep pushing the next generation forward. And that's also just, what do you do? It requires some serious societal change.
It does.
Rethinking about education, rethinking about how you fund things. I could talk about a lot of other things on that aspect, but I'm not going to go there today.
It's like that, not that soapbox today. I feel like there's like a brief moment where it's like maybe there was a potential to shift, to making some change, but I feel, at least right now, the divide is just growing, and people are happy that it's there, and like
people are satisfied with it.
And want to perpetuate it and make it more expansive. And I'm like,
the norm.
And
that's the thing, is like, I'm not accepting it as the norm. And more people around my age are starting to realize, like, this is not okay. Like, that's people from my background don't get the same experience that people from another background would. And I always say I'm very blessed to have been in the spaces that I have been in, to do this summer research or that summer research, or to even be here. I applied to Harvard because I was like, wow, I got a free waiver from this program I did. Who would have thought I'm actually here? Right? But then that goes back to just taking a chance on yourself and not letting some perception rule what decisions that you make down the line, and just putting yourself out there. And it's hard to do that whenever you don't have that support to begin with.
1,000%. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I just like growing up, like single mom, and we were poor, and so I mean a lot of it was the education that I got was because of my grandparents, but I mean still, like when it came to college, it's like, okay, well, it's loans and not even really knowing what I'm doing, trying to, I mean, grants, it's like, and like there's always like so many of these grants go unfunded, and like literally if you apply they'll give it to you regardless, like if you like fit the category. I had no idea about that until it's like, well, I'm glad it's been 10 years since I've been out of undergrad. That's real helpful to me now. But the generational poverty, and I see it reflected in my family so much, because it was like, you know, my great grandparents were coal miners in West Virginia, and my grandpa, you know, they were more well off is because he went to the Air Force, and he got that background and that training, and so he had the connections and the knowledge. But then, you know, my mom, my aunts, they, you know, they all struggle to like, what do I do? So, you know, you have to work, you have bills to pay, and now you've got kids, and so now it's just more of making sure that you have like a roof over your head and food in your mouth. And there's really not that push. It's like, how can we excel, pushing them forward, the next generation forward, like you said. So
while also keeping ourselves afloat.
Yeah, that's the hardest. So sorry. That's my personal rant. Sorry. I'm like, this is, it's just like I resonated with that. But I do, like Iris said, I like how you're pulling that all, like open science back into that. So
I think that one of the biggest things as I walked in this room was talking about like doing the interviews and things like that is transparency. Like a lot of people will ask me about like my experience at Harvard since I've been here. People back at home, people at my church, people, all types of people. And you know, it's hard to destroy those rose-colored glasses they have. It's really hard, but it needs to be done. That's the truth.
I agree.
They need to know that it's not my favorite environment. I wouldn't choose to stay in Boston. I hate to say that, but it's true.
No.
But it's very hard, and you have to have so much self-determination and so much self-drive, especially someone like me. Like, you really, really need to have that. You need to have, I have my girlfriend's texting me right now. Like, you have to have friends, people that you can relate to. You have to have those things, because if not, like, you have a bad mentor. It just breaks the straw that breaks the camel's back. Like, there's already so many other things you're trying to, I'm the first person in my family to get a professional degree to this degree. And that in itself is like, that's a lot of weight to carry. And you, of course, don't want to fail them, but you don't want to fail yourself. You want to be respectful for like what things you want to do. And then hearing what they have to say about your career, what your decisions you have made, or why have you decided to join the research that you're doing. And you have to like also break those rose-colored glasses. Like, no, I'm not necessarily doing that. I'm doing this. And this is why it's important too. And that's all very hard, but so I just feel like being transparent and being real about it is just so important. And that's one reason why like I'm so excited to like have this YouTube channel and have that platform to talk about it, because I think a lot of people kind of just shrug their shoulders like, grad school, and then I got in, and then but it's like, no, but there's so many hurdles that you've had to cross, and no one gives you a guide for that.
No.
And it looks different from everybody, and that's okay. And you just need to have that. If I had someone to look at, it would be even easier for me to do it. And that's why I consider myself a trailblazer in some senses. There's not a lot of people that look like me that are in this position that are doing what I'm trying to do. And that's okay. Being okay with that discomfort and really trying to evolve through that instead. that's been really challenging, but it's also been rewarding.
Good. Yeah, just thinking about, talking about like shattering like the rose colored glasses, having like transparency. I think a lot of it is that we have built like this kind of like mythos around Ivy Leagues, around, higher education,
around
science. Yeah. It's like, oh, you have to be a scientist to understand science. No, not really. And a lot of it is that nobody's just like opening it up and just having a conversation and speaking in layman's terms and just like finding examples of like, this might seem really complicated, but actually let me point to like in your life exactly how this is affecting it. So getting those I hate the term real world examples, but I mean maybe just like your common everyday like life example is going to connect people to that so much more there, and then that's going to open up the transparency, get rid of those, that mythos, to where we really understand like, no, it's other things, that are kind of like created it, and that no, that's great that they're doing it, but we need to know why, and like, why are they getting like all that money? Why do they have all those labs? Why are they only focused maybe on that population when we've got this situation over here? What can we do to like start spreading that around? I think a lot of it is having those frank conversations, like you said, on a whole scale of things, and breaking down that mythos, be it science, be it healthcare, be it school, education. I think that would just be a step forward, hopefully toward a better future. But
I think a lot, like when I was a child, like all the documentaries and things I used to watch, like two people I definitively remember is Bill Nye Science Guy and Neil deGrasse Tyson, both of them. Because what I found so beautiful about the way that they communicated science is that they broke it down for the non-scientists. And what I even say in my statement is they show that breaking down the science works because I'm here. And I could understand it. And you don't have to be a scientist to understand a lot of the things. You really just need to have, and that's kind of what sucks with science though, is having that ladder, having that person that is okay with being that ladder in between the science that you might not understand and where you currently are.
Yeah, exactly. It's just funny that now that I'm thinking about it, I'm watching Mythbusters at home, and it's interesting because like they don't talk about as much of the science, but I'm also thinking about like when my teachers would pull like the big cart thing out. It was like with like Bill Nye, it just did breaking down the science, but also, as you mentioned before, the creativity and the fun that comes with science, because it's fun. Like you don't know what's going to happen. Like, let's find out. It's an adventure. And that's really like what he made it to be. And I think if we could, bring back that like childhood curiosity or just that element of fun, which I think they kind of tried to do when they brought back Bill Nye on Netflix, like I think during the pandemic. And I think it did kind of help still, that it's like, okay, we're all adults now. We're going to talk about this, but you're keeping that plain language, that fun, that adventure. And it's like, we're going to figure it out. You don't know how this works. We're going to figure it out. Maybe we break something. That's okay. We learned something.
Exactly. And it's always, that's the beauty of science. It's always about learning. If you're someone that loves to learn, then you should definitely be a scientist, because that's all you're going to do.
And I think for people who maybe are cautious around science, is that we don't talk about the mistakes and like these experiments fail all the time. And so we have to try again. And I think we have kind of set ourselves up as, well, we figured it out. Like, we tested it and it was good. And it's like, well, how many times did it take you until you got that, till you found the right answer? And so I think kind of going back to like also the mythos is like, we've created ourselves as like giants that are infallible, and actually no, we don't know everything, and we failed a whole lot of times to get there. And it would be nice if that was just also plainly stated that this is a learning experience. It does not matter what degree you have, you are like you said, constantly learning.
Like that whole saying, failure is not an option.
No.
Girl.
No.
Like failure is your daily life as a scientist, and then something works. Like it's really about problem solving and trying to figure out, okay, well, what can I tweak? What can I change? What do I need to do longer? What temperature needs to be set?
Yeah.
Like all of those things, all just trial and error. And you have to be comfortable with that. And that can be very challenging to see. And I mean, I'm still struggling with that myself. But realistically, it's almost like a disclaimer that should be like, if you're interested in the science career, like, you will have failures, and you will have more failures than success by far.
Oh yeah.
But it's the success and the excitement, the curiosity, the problem solving, all those things that keep you going and keep you wanting to do more science.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Well, we have been talking for 40 minutes. So, do you have anything else you'd like to add to like this very wonderful conversation? I mean, and oh gosh, if you forget something and have to come back, I guess we can figure it out.
I guess that would be okay.
I guess we can make that happen.
I think, like, if I had to give like a last word of advice, always be passionate about the things you want to do. And it can be so easy, especially in today's world, especially with social media, especially with parents, especially with the premise of money, of being like what you need to be sustained in this society. Like, it's hard to do something daily that you just don't love. It is so much harder. And one piece of advice that I've heard recently is hard life now, easy life later. Hard choice now, easy life later. Yeah. Easy choice now, hard life later. And sure, you might just choose to do something because someone told you to do, and that's the easiest answer. And okay, I'm gonna just go do it. Yeah. But now down the line, whenever you end up finding out, I don't really like this, I'm not really passionate about it. Now what do? You're kind of stuck because you've already gotten this professional degree, your family's dependent on it, all these other things. But if you would have made that hard choice back then of like, okay, I'm gonna do the uncomfortable, and I'm gonna there's no one in my family that's done this, but I'm just gonna be the first one to do it. Yeah. Like, making that uncomfortable decision now will put you in such a better and more passionate and exciting place later, where you will always be fulfilled, regardless of what income, what family, what other external factor people try to apply and say that you're successful or not successful based on this. It's really about finding your own passion and finding what makes you excited and what way you can change the world from that. I think that's what's most important. I want more people to be able to see that and embrace it.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so excited. It was a wonderful story.